I analyzed the data from 4,000 observations of 3i Atlas over the past 4.5 months. So all of the data from 227 observatories on Earth shows no deviation from a trajectory shaped by gravity alone. And that means that despite the push on the object, it must be extremely massive to resist it. It doesn't care about it. And so I obtained a minimum mass of 33 billion tons for this object, which is at least 1,000 times more than the previous interstellar comet that we saw back in 2019. So the question arises as to how come this is such a giant object comparable to Manhattan Island when the previous one, was so much smaller. The previous one was the size of a football field. This one is the size of Manhattan Island. It's quite a difference. And you would expect many more of the small ones before you see a big one like that. So that's a puzzling fact. Also, today there was a report about nickel coming out of this object without much iron. And again, that is a very unusual property of it. And also we know that the object came along a path that is aligned with the plane of the planets around the sun. And that's highly unusual because the chance for that happening at random is 1 in 500. In addition, just a few days ago, I realized that back on August 15th, 1977, there was a very famous flare in the radio signal that was given the name the wow signal because the observers that recorded it at Ohio State University was stunned at how powerful this signal was. And wrote wow in the document that records that signal, and so it's called the wow signal from 1977. And I checked it. Turns out that it came from about the same direction in the sky as 3i Atlas, within 9 degrees. And the chance for a random alignment of the two directions of 9 degrees or so is 0.6%. So the question arises whether this wow signal from 1977 was transmitted by 3i Atlas. We don't know, and there was no report on radio observations of 3i Atlas so far. So I'm encouraging radio astronomers around the world to check out whether there is any radio transmission from 3i Atlas. I calculated that back in 1977, the object was 600 times farther from us than the sun is. And that was a large distance. And presumably, if it had transmitted that signal, it had quite a powerful transmitter, about a gigawatt, according to my calculations, which is comparable to the power output of a nuclear reactor that we have on Earth. So all of these are interesting tidbits that came along across the past week or so. But in addition, yesterday, I decided to submit a white paper to the United Nations, basically calling for the creation of a committee that will analyze what we know about interstellar objects that come into the solar system from outside, similar to 3i Atlas, that look anomalous, because we have to be prepared for a black swan event, an event with a small probability that could change everything for us. And it's really important to be prepared for that. And currently, there is no international organization. Obviously, alien technology would be a threat to all humans on Earth. It wouldn't care how we split the land on this rock that we call our home, the Earth. And so it's an international matter, and we need to be organized in that fashion. And I'm suggesting, given that the Rubin Observatory in Chile will find a new interstellar object every few months in the coming decade, that we attend to each of those through a committee that would look at all the data, use all the assets we have to evaluate the risk or the threat, how anomalous the object is, and then decide about how to respond to it if it looks suspicious.
When you say respond, that's the key word there. If this ends up being a threat, what does that look like for us? How do we respond, and who leads that effort?
Well, that's an excellent question because just think about ants that are sitting in the crack of a pavement and they see a biker passing by. The ants would have no way of doing anything about the biker because they just don't have the ability to cope with the biker, and they don't have the means to communicate with the biker. And so we might be in a similar situation where we have no way of affecting the actions of alien technology that comes to visit us because it's far more advanced than any technologies that we possess. But we should be aware of that. As of now, we learned the lesson from the dinosaurs that were killed 66 million years ago by a giant rock the size of Manhattan Island, roughly the size of 3i Atlas, that hit the Earth. So we are preparing for that. We are saying, let's monitor the sky for any rocks that are flying by and then we can deflect them. But that assumes that, it's a rock. Nobody imagines a situation where it might be alien technology. And that's something that we must entertain, given that we launched spacecraft that will exit the solar system, like Voyager, for example. And we just did it over the past 50 years. Imagine if we had continued research and development in science and technology over a period of 1,000 years instead of 100 years, or over a period of 1,000,000 years. And that's some benefit that another civilization might have relative to us.
Obviously, as a scientist, this is right up your wheelhouse, and you're calling on policymakers to do more as well. Why should
Right.
the average American, or here in Chicago, Chicagoan watching at home, why should they follow this?
Right. So, I mean, you could decide to not to lose any sleep on that. And that is if you prefer to believe that anything in the sky is a rock. Okay, so including objects that come into our vicinity, close to our home. And the situation is similar to suppose you look through the window and you see an animal coming into your backyard. The most likely situation is that it's a street cat. Now, if you see that the animal has a tail that is not coming out of its rear end, but it's coming from its forehead, and you realize that the animal is 1,000 times more massive than the previous street cat that came into your backyard, wouldn't you be alert to that animal? Because, it also comes close to various assets that you have in your backyard. You would be worried that it may come through the front door. You may lose some sleep. However, if you want to ignore it and just say, everything that comes into my backyard must be a street cat, you can live in peace. And of course, ignorance about the environment is self-promoted. We can decide not to care about it. We can insist that everything in the sky is comets. But that will not change the nature of objects that come to our backyard. If we have a neighbor, some intelligent civilization that happens to be not far from us, the fact that we ignore it would not change its existence. Having a neighbor has nothing to do with the opinions that we hold. It just for the same reason that the Earth was moving around the sun for 4.5 billion years before the Vatican insisted that it's moving around, that the sun moves around the Earth. And the Earth continued to move around the sun irrespective of what the Vatican said. And so for the same reason, if whether we have a neighbor, whether we are being visited by alien technology, these facts would not depend on what we say about them. We can ignore them and sleep well, that's fine. But I'm suggesting that we should be aware of that possibility because we launch technological gadgets out of the solar system.
All right, Professor Loeb. Well, hopefully, if we do have some neighbors, hopefully they're the friendly kind for sure. Thanks so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me. And by the way, by the end of this week, we should have a very good photograph of 3i Atlas with a pixel resolution of 30 kilometers from the Mars orbiters. And stay tuned. Let's see what we see in that image.